All right, today we'll be talking about Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out by Mo Yan and translated by Howard Goldblatt. Um, where to start with this? So, I did not want to read this book as quickly as I did, but due to circumstances, I have to quickly try and read through The Grapes of Wrath. And the circumstances arose, unfortunately, when I was about 40 pages into this book, and that meant that I had to read the entirety of the rest of the book, which it's 540 pages, but each page has quite a solid amount of print on it, so definitely closer to 600, between 600 and 650 pages by like most print. And I had to cram it in like 2 days. And I just want to say that I hate reading on a schedule like this. It's the number one reason why I don't use the library, why I hate using the library, and why I have always never really enjoyed reading books in class. Usually if I enjoy something in school, I will go back and reread it after, because the just process of reading under a time limit really changes the reading experience for me. But the reason... So one thing that I really want to shout out over this whole review is that I am just going to butcher names. I am not 100% like... I remember who characters are, but the details are a bit muddy. Like, I had to cram to rush through this. But that said, we're going to get into this a little bit, but with the context of why this book. I read Frog by this author. I want to read more East Asian books, that much should be obvious, and so a while back I was looking for Chinese authors, came across Mo Yan, I don't know how to pronounce it. We're already off to a great start there. And I got both Frog and this book. And I read Frog, and it was really, really interesting, but I can't say I love it. It's one of those books where, like, the details, and it's fascinating historically and whatnot, and it has some really captivating scenes, especially as ignorant as I am of China's actual history in the early days of communism. So that aspect of it was fascinating, but as a story, I found I didn't really care too much for the characters or their fates or whatever. But all the same, definitely stuck out in my mind. So this was always one that I kind of wanted to get to, but also, much like The Stolen Bicycle, wasn't high on my list. So given the current context, it got moved up and moved away the hell up, apparently. So that's why I finally got around to reading it. The synopsis, or the what it's about, the setup, is actually very interesting. It follows a character named, I believe it's Chimen Niao, and he is a landlord who dies during the revolution, the communist revolution in China, and it's about his various reincarnations. First as a donkey, then as an ox, then as a pig, then as a dog, then extremely briefly as a monkey and a child. And each kind of section follows him in a different form throughout the various stages of China's history. Specifically, even though he is kind of like the main character, the point of view character in some cases, although in some cases the point of view is someone else, as we'll get to. Really, the story is about this family. Both him, his wife, and his two concubines, because this is another one of those 1,000 Years of Solitude, pachinko, whale type family stories, generational stories, that also closely mirrors the history of a place. And it's not surprising that it came to this, because Gabriel Marquez is a huge source of inspiration for Mo Yan. So that his books end up taking on this kind of generational scope is not surprising. And it brings me back to those words that are the oh-so-common words. This isn't my type of story. Generally speaking, as I've said in the past about these types of stories, I don't care much for generational saga-like stories. But this one in particular, the way that it's told is very interesting in the sense that, like I said, it follows Chimen Now as a first-person narrator for the first part. Then the second part follows a different character. I actually have to. There's a pronunciation guide. Lan. Thank God there's a fucking list of characters, or I would be so lost right now. Lan. I believe it's Jifang. I'm not 100% sure though, so I'm just gonna go with Lan Jifang. Who narrates from the Ox section, and then what ends up happening throughout the story is it ends up being kind of a back and forth, really you realize, conversation, where Chimen Now is explaining to Lan Jiefeng about his experiences going through this cycle of reincarnation, where intermittently the author himself, who appears as a character, will interject. And what this does is it creates a pretty big divide between the characters and you as a reader. So not only is it third person, which creates a bit of a divide, but then it's a story being told by somebody else, which creates a bit of a divide. But then on top of that, it's actually a dialogue between two people, which creates a bit of a divide. But then on top of that, the author himself will come in and make notes and make frequent asides, and this constantly reminds you that it's a story, so it creates another divide. So you're very, very far removed from the inner workings and the psyche of the characters, which for me, like the existential psyche and whatnot, is the biggest appeal of reading. It's what I always look for in reading. It's why I like Dostoevsky and Murakami and why am I forgetting Nosgard so much, is just this sort of interior existential question. And these kinds of books are the exact opposite of that. But that said, there is a playfulness to this book that I think really elevates it. It does not take itself super seriously, despite having serious moments dealing with serious issues, and really having some dark twists. It just has a playfulness about it. It has uplifting moments, wins set up early on that pay off later, to the point where I could so easily see this. When I say that, like, a story could be adapted for a TV show or something, that makes it sound like I'm picturing it as an adaptation, as a TV show. But what I really think, more so than saying, like, I could see this adapted as a TV show, is that this reads very much like a TV show, in the sense that each chapter is an episode, each reincarnation is like a season, and it has kind of a beginning, middle, and end to each chapter, even though you have these threads that are set up and run throughout it. Each season, again, being through the point of view of not just a different animal, but a different decade, a different lifestyle, gives such a unique perspective to each one that it's not like they stand on their own, because there are these ongoing plot threads, but they have their own unique identity to them. And in that sense, it becomes a very one-of-a-kind story. And definitely, like I said, despite making those earlier comparisons, it has so much of its own identity to it. And especially if you don't know much about the history of China, or if you are somebody who still thinks of China as like this super communist place, then I think that this particular book would be a really great insight, because of how it goes through the various stages of China post revolution, and gets into some of the nitty-gritty about the politics that went on there, but while at the same time still keeping it in the context of this family drama. And so in that sense, to whom would I recommend this book to? Again, anybody who liked 100 Years of Solitude, anybody who's interested in Chinese history, anybody who likes these kinds of sweeping family sagas, absolutely check out this book. The only people that I would be kind of hesitant to recommend it to, well, again, aside from those who really want a more internal focused stories are the people who have already read like Frog, because then like to me I had a hard time getting into it at first, because so much of the earlier stuff I feel was already mentioned in Frog, stuff like the Cultural Revolution and the way the youths acted, the four it wasn't four brothers, but the four like young generals or whatever it was, in the Cultural Revolution was touched on in Frog. And a lot of this comes from Mo Yan being himself, writing from his personal experiences, writing from his life, I guess, according to him. Marquez was an inspiration for the sort of magical realism and the way he presented his culture, and Faulkner was an inspiration for him in the way that he could write about real people if he just changed their names a little bit. So in that sense, I don't. It's difficult to say when you've only read 2 stories. Really, 3 gives you a good triangulation. But so maybe I just picked 2 books that are really very, very similar. But coming from Frog, it being set in the same place in the same time, while Frog does deal more explicitly with childbirth and child rearing, whereas Life and Death and Wearing Me Out seems to be more broadly focused on agriculture and the agricultural revolution. I think that there's still so much overlap that where the main appeal for me is the historical side of things, that got sort of tamped down a little bit. But don't let that sound like the book is just strictly retreading old ground or whatever. And I don't think you should, if you haven't read a book before, I think Life and Death Are Wearing Me Out is one that I would recommend over Frog, just because, again, there's such an entertainment aspect to it, such a fable-like aspect to it, that I think is going to make it much more broadly appealing than Frog, which isn't to say Frog is bad at all by any stretch of the imagination, just that I think this is going to be the more appealing one. So moving on into pros and cons. As I've already said, the pros, the humor, I really like the history and the way it's portrayed and the way it is almost written as if it's for people who don't have that kind of background, because it really does walk you through a lot of it. And another pro that I will give the book is the way that it does balance the dark and humorous aspects, because it's not going to stick to this kind of like really happy fable, but it's also not going to become so dark and so depressing that there's no hope either, because that's life. If there's absolutely no hope, then people will just give up and either kill themselves or directly or indirectly. People find hope. People are adaptable. So finding the humor in the bad moments, and recognizing though that the good moments don't last, and that terrible things did happen to people who didn't deserve it, I think is a huge part of this book in understanding, and I think the way that it balances it in the prose is really well done. In terms of the cons, like I said, the distance between the reader and the characters means that there's not a lot of interior for the psychology of the characters, which I've mentioned this before as kind of a con when I did Whale, and it's a nature of these. It's the nature of these types of books. They go for that macro view over a micro one, and lest I become redundant, while also acknowledging that there are people who didn't necessarily watch the Whale review. Certain sacrifices have to be made for this kind of story. So while you do again get the sort of generational impacts of things, and you do get this macro perspective where you can see how the consequences of the father go on to affect the son throughout his life, which then goes on to affect the grandson. You get that sort of scope and scale. You really, really miss out on the micro psychology, the sort of ennui, the sort of interior, I keep saying existential, but also like spiritual questions, and not just spiritual in a religious sense, but in that more, like I said, existential type way. And lacking those types of things, is, for me, kind of what makes it. I'm just repeating myself at this point. What makes it makes me struggle to connect with it to the same degree that I would most books, which is why I'm left in a situation where, even though I really enjoyed the book, it's not going to be one. And I found it very interesting in terms of that deeper emotional connection. It doesn't really exist for me. But in terms of like something that I would call a big con, like a real con, and even this isn't like it's nitpicky, and I want that to be clear to anybody. It's very, very nitpicky. It's in the way that sometimes asides will kind of pop up and run for a page, and like I said, a page is about a page and a half of most other books. And these asides can sometimes just distract from the main story and get in the way and add length to something that's already pretty long. But from what I gather, this whole thing was written in 42 days, which is a crap ton of writing, and I don't know how much of it was edited. So while it doesn't quite fall into the maximalist, I don't want to say trap, but the maximalist sort of style of like an Infinite Jest or a Pynchon or a Caratescu, it nonetheless still has some of those traits of maybe just being something that is very wild and not very neat or tidy or trimmed or edited, or it doesn't have that crystal polish sheen that some of the other books that I've talked about have been. Something like where I said with The Stolen Bicycle, it felt like there really wasn't a whole lot of fat to that book, whereas this book feels like it has quite a bit of fat, but such is generally the nature of these kind of big books that kind of try to cram everything into a book. And moving into the themes, because the other pro that I really want to get into is really a thematic pro. This is a book that tries to cram just about everything into it, that has so much going on for it that my silly little video, being a macro book, that like a silly little video like this is going to struggle to really convey. And while it would be easy for me to say that being this sort of macro view, it doesn't have the depth, breadth versus depth, because it's covering so many things. It's not necessarily getting that deep interior or that deep interrogation of let's say something like marriage, to even move away from something existential, but the relationship between a man and a wife, or man and a man, or a woman and a woman, at any rate, deep romantic connection to marriage. Marriage is something more social, but what makes love and whatnot. It touches on love a lot. There's a lot of different kinds of love in the story, but none of it is explored in this super duper nuanced way. And even when there is like a question of love, it's really more of a question of, well, these two characters love each other. What is the consequence that it's going to have on both them and their families? And, is it right for two people who are quote unquote in true love to have these sort of consequences on, to sort of pass the consequences on to their family members if it's going to bring public shame to them? Like I said, this is something that happens. It takes up like 20 pages or whatever, and it's not interrogated on that sort of deeper level. But, and this is where I prefer that type of thing, but this is where the huge but comes in. What I think this book does really, really well, and what I really think is the best aspect of this type of macro view, is it highlights how things that seem important in the moment end up not being as important as time goes on. Things that didn't seem important in the moment end up becoming really important as time goes on. And history is just a constant flowing. I always think of time as like a river flowing perpetually downstream. And anytime anything tries to stand still in it, it's just swept along and forgotten. And this is where the whole story starts with the main character in the underworld proclaiming his innocence being so driven by hatred at the injustice of what has happened to him. And yet, gradually, throughout each reincarnation, his anger and bitterness lessens each time as he experiences more life, but also as the things that happened to him fade into the past. It's really fascinating to see the earlier stages of the revolution and the commune and the communal spirit, and everybody sort of binding, joining together to create this new prosperous communal society, which seems like the inevitable flow, and to me is always what I've heard about China, communist China, and communism in general, in the same way that the sort of Russian Revolution and the comrades binding together and the communes and work for the workers and fuck the proletariat and whatnot. But by the time you really get to the dog, to the pig, to some extent, but really the dog, the commune is completely dissolved. Land ownership ends up back in mostly private hands. Like, it's all owned by the government, but the government deals it out to individuals. That whole spirit of the commune, the whole communist ideal, is basically just a thing of the past. And whether you agree with communism or disagree with communism, it's more sad in the sense that while there was a lot of corruption, there was also a belief in something greater, in something bigger, that really, by the end of the book, ends up really as just a sort of return to the same landowning ideas, but the land ownership is in the hand of the state rather than the hand of the few individuals, the landowners. But the state itself, being made up of individuals, just means that the ruling class still exists. It's just existing under a different coat now. And I think this really becomes encapsulated in the character of Jin Long. Not just, like, Jin Long is his own character in the sense that throughout each of the different eras, books, reincarnations, whatever, you see him constantly trying to ingratiate himself with those in power. But as the son of his father, Jimen Now, the main character, the landowner who is killed at the start of the story for being a landowner, despite being by most accounts a fairly reasonable one, far from the worst, and maybe even a good person at heart. At first, he joins the commune and is Lan Jinglong, taking on a different name and distancing himself from his father. But once individual ownership kind of returns as a thing, he takes back the surname Jimen, his father's surname, and eventually comes to head up a corporation and become a CEO and become one of the wealthiest individuals in the state. So in that sense, you had his father who was killed for being a landowner, but then the son goes on and becomes a rich individual who is able to buy up land and becomes the very same thing, albeit minus any of the charity that his father contained. So seeing these sort of cycles play out, seeing the reinstatement of the old ways, but under a new facade, it's harrowing, really, and it's something that thematically I think is best explored and best shown through this type of storytelling. Even if I don't necessarily, it's not necessarily what I look for in storytelling. It's just such a salient point, and it's something that I really admired about the book and stood out to me about it. So while there's a lot more to say in terms of themes, in terms of destiny, in terms of fate, in terms of fathers and sons, and the reflection there, the stubbornness, the willingness to stand up against social pressure and make your own way. The way that, for example, not Lan Zhifeng, but his father, Lan Liang. Lian. Okay, when Lan Lian is Lan Lian, good God. When Lan Lian in the first two reincarnations is an independent farmer at this time when everybody is trying to make a commune, he ends up the enemy of everyone else. But then once independent land becomes a thing again, rather than being the enemy of everyone else and a social pariah, he ends up being praised, a forward thinker and whatnot. And meanwhile, the guy who I believe killed Ximen now at the start of the story goes from being somebody in charge of the commune and a true believer in the red communal future to being the social outcast, to watching this dream, even though he's a corrupt individual, to watching everything that he stood for crumble away and the old ways reassert themselves, and he definitely ends up becoming the pariah. And then where Lan Liang's stubbornness, like I said, with reference to his independent farming and his refusal to go along with this social pressure, social norms, ends up becoming a point of conflict with his son when his son wants to divorce his wife in order to marry a different woman, a younger woman. And once again, his son stubbornly clings to his belief of right and wrong, ignoring all of the social norms. So there's that sort of between the stubbornness of this family, the landowning and wealth aspect of the Ximen family, there's a lot of father, son, mother, daughter, sort of filial traits being passed down and reflected in these characters, which is another big theme of the book. And again, something that you get from a macro story like this. And this is all I really want to say. It's obvious that I kind of had to, I didn't have to objectively, but that I did blitz through it, that I enjoyed it, that I thought it was interesting. It's not totally my type of book, but definitely something that I think that people should read and can get something out of. So take that for what it is and give it a shot if you're at all curious in Chinese literature, anything about the Chinese Revolution or China's history. Solid, entertaining book. And I will join you next time where I will probably talk about The Grapes of Wrath, unless I so utterly hate it that I decide to drop it. I have no idea because I have spent my entire life growing up being told that it is one of the worst books that both of my parents have ever been forced to read. So, weehoo, looking forward to that.